Welcome to Don't Wait Till Pigs Fly, a podcast for and about women with chronic illness, autoimmune diseases and invisible disabilities. Here we share resources, accountability, knowledge and caring for each other in a way that brings hope to those who have felt a lack of value and worth due to the stigma and gaslighting around their illnesses.
Record. Here we go. Hey everybody, how are you today? I'm Nancy, the founder and president of Invisible Warriors. 1 out of every 2 adult Americans lives with at least one chronic illness, often called a hidden disability. The disability community is the largest minority in the world, yet instead of feeling inclusive and wrapped in camaraderie, most of us feel alone, unvalued, and unworthy. We need doctors who understand us and colleagues and family members who believe us when we tell them something about our health. Just knowing the simple fact that we are not alone and still have much to offer can be life-changing. In this podcast, we share tips and strategies, knowledge and support. In other words, hope for those who are looking for resources to help them maintain a thriving, successful life. Do you have a chronic illness? Well, here at Don't Wait Till Pigs Fly, we have conversations that share the tools and mindsets others use to make our lives better. It's always good to know that there are others out there that have dealt with similar challenges. And our guest today is going to share with us their history and what they've learned along the way. Welcome, Susan Salinger.
Well, thank you so much. And those statistics are mind-blowing. I did not realize all of that. And it's fascinating, just fascinating.
Well, and what's even more interesting is when you do think about chronic illness and different things like that, you think about the older generation, the people who are in their 60s and up. The largest growing population of women with hidden disabilities are the ones that are in their 30s.
It's amazing. Well, I know just from my own research, and I did research on women and illness, not necessarily chronic illness. But of course, I talked with women who have chronic illnesses, and my research showed me that it takes about maybe, you'll know this more than me, 5 to 7 years to get a correct diagnosis for a chronic illness. And so many of them told me that they got a psychological diagnosis and they were told that they were under stress and to take this antidepressant or that antidepressant.
Yeah. And that's what Invisible Warriors, my nonprofit, is all about, is trying to tell these doctors that they have to be more aware of what's going on and not just zone in on one little aspect of something, but to look at the whole body, to look at what the person's personality and lifestyle and everything is in order to truly give a diagnosis. I'm going on 9 years after my car accident, and they still don't really know, and they're sending me I've seen over 3,000 doctors.
Oh, my Lord. And you still can't get an accurate diagnosis.
Nope. We're heading up to 2 new ones in Nashville at Vanderbilt next month. And there's always this hope. And I bet we went by your introduction and didn't even say who you are or what you do. Susan, tell us about your book first, and then we'll get back into the conversation.
I will, and I absolutely want to come back to what you just said, because I have a couple of thoughts on it. Don't let me forget. Being older, I call it a brain fart. Some people call it a senior moment, but bring me back to it. Anyway, I wrote the book just real quickly because of an unfortunate experience I had many, many years ago, where I was on some medication for osteoporosis, and the doctor said, "Hey, there's a new medication on the market. Why don't you try it?" I mean, sure, And so I tried it, and then I started experiencing some what I thought were common side effects. And he said, no, I've never had anybody experience these side effects. And I said, well, of course not, because you just told me it was new. But he said, no. Anyway, to make a long story short again, he wanted me to have exploratory surgery. And I pushed back a little bit. I said, why don't we just go back on the old hormones and see what happens? But he was really concerned for me. I had some vaginal bleeding, and that is a sign of ovarian cancer. or can be. And he liked me, and I was a young mother with young kids, and he was frightened. And of course, then I got frightened. And so I agreed to have the surgery. In fact, I insisted it be done sooner rather than later. And then had the surgery, everything was fine. I went back on the old hormones, and of course, the symptoms stopped. And, you know, I wasn't angry at him, because if he'd been right, he would have saved my life. But he wasn't right. And I should have at least waited a week or two. I certainly wasn't going to keel over in the next 30 seconds. And I could have done a lot more than I did. But I was angry at myself. I was ashamed. And then I kind of just put it to bed. Life goes on, and that's what you do. But many, many years later, after I retired, my husband and I sold our business, and I went back to school and just started taking some anthropology classes, medical anthropology, actually. And one of the classes I took, I did a project on women who had had hysterectomies. And much to my surprise, many of them had agreed to the surgery, and they didn't think they needed it. So that acted like a trigger. And I thought, oh my gosh, that happened to me. I wonder how many more women this has happened to. And I got very interested in how we as women make medical decisions. So then I interviewed about 40 or 50 women, mostly with what I call women's diseases, you know, breast cancer, autoimmune, lupus, fibromyalgia, Sjogren's disease, whatever. And I heard many of the same stories that, again, they also had agreed to treatments that they didn't think were necessary or knew in their hearts were probably not the right ones. And that's the book, you know, so it talks about but women really we don't do what we really need to do to take the best care of ourselves. And sometimes that's structural from the doctors. There's things we can do when there is gender bias, for example. So there are things we can do to overcome that. And a lot of the problem stems from women themselves. And so that's what the book is about.
And it's wonderful. I can't put it down, and I have to keep putting it down because I have other things I have to do. And It's frustrating because it's really a great book. And we will go back to what we were talking about before, but I want to touch on this while I'm thinking of it.
Of course.
The women themselves, and you talk about this in the book. We've got to take our kids to school. We've got to cook the dinner. We've got the house to clean. I don't have time to be sick, and it'll go away soon.
Right.
And, you know,
right.
So we don't pay as much attention to issues as we should, on the one hand. On the other hand, we get the doctors and the family members and the friends who say, oh, come on, you're just being lazy, or, you know, you're making it up. I was literally, back in April, I was in the emergency room at the hospital where I live. And I was there for COVID, but I was in my wheelchair.
Yeah.
And the doctor said to me, well, why are you here? And I said, well, I'm here because I've got COVID and I can't breathe. And he said, well, but why are you in a wheelchair? And I said, because I have complex regional pain syndrome. He looks at the other medical professional in the room. He looks back at me. He says, I've never heard of that. You're making it up. He had his phone in his hand. And I looked back at him and I said, you have a smartphone, Google it.
Good for you. And did he?
No.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, but I mean, months ago this happened. I've got a friend across the street who's on my board of directors, who is bouncing from doctor to doctor to doctor with diagnosis after diagnosis, and take this medication. No, take this medication. No, you can't take that because it interferes with this. And, you know, so we've got all of these things that are hitting us from all these different directions. How did you see these women finally coming to terms with the fact that they had some sort of disability, illness, and dealing with it?
It's interesting that you asked me that, because what I also did is I interviewed them. The book took me about 10 years or so to write because, I did it part-time and I have grandchildren and all of that, and also a lot of research. So although I interviewed them in whatever year it was, I went back to them when I finished the book to see how they were doing and if they had indeed accepted their disability, accepted their chronic illness. And most of them had. They had come to terms with it in one way or another, through different ways. One woman turned to religion. Another woman did a lot of volunteer work, which gave her tremendous satisfaction. But I think one of the things we should talk about, at least today in this podcast, is that women and men talk to doctors differently. And that could be important in terms of getting a more accurate diagnosis more quickly. First of all, men are much more succinct. They're much more objective. They're much more matter of fact. They go in and they say, I have a pain in my leg or my foot or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Women, however, talk about their illness in context. We describe how we feel about it and how it's affecting our lives. We give, and I'm very guilty of this, I give the full story. I don't want to miss a point because I want the doctor to fully understand all of the things that are going on. But what happens is that sometimes, in fact, often, your physical symptoms can get overwhelmed by your emotional ones. And it can be hard to remember why you went in the first place. The doctor, he or she will be off talking about that I'm stressed. And I'm finally realizing, well, of course I'm stressed. I broke my arm, But I think that we have to be very careful. I think we need to tell doctors how we feel. I'm not saying we shouldn't. But I am saying that we need to be sure that our physical symptoms don't get pushed off and sidelined. You're not there for your emotional symptoms, or if you are, that's great. But, usually we go to a different kind of doctor for that. So I think that's one thing that women can do to take charge and sort of focus the interview. The other thing I want to talk about just for a quick minute, which may help, when you do go to the doctor and know that, as you said, autoimmune diseases can, really take a while to diagnose. So go in with an agenda, have a written list, not one in your head. That doesn't count. Have a written list, prioritized, of what you want to talk about. That will help you keep the visit on focus and off of your emotions, which is what I was just saying. And it also helps the doctor stay on focus. It keeps the whole thing on track. And I think, too, that that's a very important thing to do, because women do get psychological diagnoses more than men do. And we want to be sure that that doesn't happen unless it's accurate. And see, that's the other thing. Nothing here is so simple. We do get suffer from anxiety and depression more than men do. So the doctor could be right. He or she is not necessarily blowing you off. It just kind of depends how it goes.
Yeah. And I mean, that is a normal side effect. Depression,
Yes.
And my husband says, well, you're depressed. I go, no, I'm not.
I mean, why wouldn't you be?
Well, that's the point. You've got all these aches and pains that nobody can figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
You go to 3,000 different doctors and, they all have different diagnoses for you. You've got your husband saying, I just want my dinner. I don't care about any of this other stuff.
Right.
So, and then you get depressed because you think, I can't do what I used to do. And everybody is telling me there's nothing wrong with me. Well, maybe I am losing my mind. Maybe it is all in my head. So of course we're depressed. Of course we have.
I agree with that.
And the statistics are incredible in that if you look at the cycle of a woman after she's been diagnosed with a chronic or autoimmune disability, they most of the time will lose their jobs. The statistics are incredibly high on the number of women who lose their jobs because they're going to the doctor. They can't get out of bed. They've got foggy brain days.
Right.
All these things, and their bosses say, well, we can't work with you if you can't do your job. So they lose their jobs. They lose their income. They lose their insurance. 21% higher rate of divorce in families where the women have chronic illness than there are in non-medically conditioned families.
And now they've lost their income.
Yep, they've lost their income. They've lost their husband. They lose their home. They become homeless. They start taking drugs. So because that's the only thing they can find to alleviate the pain.
Right.
And then they do become depressed, and 7 out of 10 attempt suicide at least once.
Oh, that's just, those are terrible statistics, terrible. And I think that leads us, I want to talk for a minute. We were, just so everybody knows, Nancy and I were talking before this all began, before the podcast, about the invisibility of it, of a chronic disease. I mean, I was telling Nancy that I'm holding my arm up. I forgot most of you can't see. But anyway, I broke my arm and I've got this black thing on me, it's temporary cast, I guess it is. And I mean, people are so nice to me. They say, they open the door. They say, can I help you? I mean, I have all of the support that I don't really need because, it's a broken arm. I'm not going to die in 6 or 8 weeks. It'll be just fine. But people with invisible illnesses, like the women I talked with who have fibromyalgia and lupus, and for that matter, even breast cancer is invisible to the naked eye anyway. They don't have the support that I'm getting for what is really a not very serious condition. It's inconvenient, but that's a different conversation. And what's so interesting to me is many, many, many of the women I interviewed were so ashamed of being ill. And I'll bet that's certainly true of women with chronic illnesses. The shame was just overwhelming for some of them. And I found that so many of them blamed their illness on stress, particularly the fibromyalgia and lupus people. This was so interesting to me. They saw their illness as a public manifestation of their inability to manage their lives. If they could only manage their stress better, the lupus wouldn't have come or the fibromyalgia wouldn't have come. And we just so often forget how random illness is. Some people get COVID and some don't. Some alcoholics get liver disease and some don't. I could go on and on.
And that's really interesting because the other side of that is both fibro and I've got fibro, both fibro and lupus are increased. They're made worse by stress.
Of course. Yeah.
But they're not caused by stress.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. And the mind and body are so stress can exacerbate anything, for sure. I got to tell you 2 fun stories talking about, reminds me when you say stress, because the mind and body are so connected. You're going to love this. So researchers took 2 groups of students and put them in 2 different rooms and gave one group iced coffee and the other group hot coffee. Then they gave each of them a script about a fictitious person. And the people with the warm coffee saw the fictitious person as warm and lovable compared to the people with the iced coffee who judged that person much more harshly. Isn't that lovely? So our body really does affect what we think. And now I'm going to reverse it on you because our mind also affects our body. Different study, different researchers, but they took 2 groups of students and put them in 2 different rooms. And one group was asked to talk about a time they felt socially rejected. The other group was asked to describe a time they felt socially accepted. The group that felt socially accepted judged the room to be 5 degrees warmer than the people who felt socially rejected. So the people that felt shut out and cold judged the room to be colder. So certainly stress does affect our bodies. And vice versa. That's my point.
Yeah. really fascinating.
I know, isn't that fun? I love
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, it's amazing. So, that goes back to the fact that, of course, with everything that's going on in our lives, and it's like I have to thank my husband profusely because he supports me, he takes care of me, he does everything in his power. We're not one of those 21% that get
Right,
divorced,
I can tell. Yeah.
But because of that, I feel free to talk about these things, to share these, to get out there and advocate and to say, come on, people, you can do it.
Right.
Whereas if you're in a situation where, your family is moaning and groaning and your boss is saying, come on, you've got a job to do. And,
right.
All of those things. Of
Think
course.
positive. That's what people say. And it drives me nuts.
Yeah. We're not going to be, those people are not going to be as willing to get up and out there and say, hey, listen in, guys.
Right,
I've got fibro. And the fact is, they're the ones that should be doing it. Right. More so because they're the ones that have to be the advocate for themselves in order to change the minds of the people in their world.
And this is actually not my book, but there should be, I feel like there should be structural changes, government regulations to help people maintain an income, if not a job. Some people can work and some can't. That's for sure. But
and the ADA is a very, very powerful law. Nobody talks about it, nobody knows about it, and nobody acts on it.
Yeah. Wow. It's just a whole different world, isn't it?
It sure is. And interesting, I'm doing a lot of work right now in the travel industry. And it's with things like, okay, you call and book a room ahead of time and you say, I need an accessible room. I need it to be on the first or second floor because I can walk, but I can't walk a lot. And if I've got a lot to do, I go in my wheelchair.
Sure.
And so in a hotel, they always put me all the way at the end of these long halls,
Yeah, always,
so I'm always in my wheelchair. And I call and I ask for an accessible room. We get there and they say, yes, no problem. We've got you booked. You get there and you say, I'm here for my reservation. And they say, well, Ms. Becker, you're on the 15th floor. And I'll go, excuse me. I said first or second. Oh, well, we didn't have anything available. I said, tell me how I can get from the 15th floor to the first floor if there's a fire and the elevator quits working. I am petrified of being up on one of those higher levels.
Of course.
Not having an elevator working.
I don't blame you.
Well, this last hotel we were in, I asked for an accessible room on the first or second floor. Well, our rooms start on the third floor. Okay, I could deal with the third floor. Why'd you put me on the 10th floor? And they put us in a room at the very end of the hallway. That was such a small room that I couldn't even get the wheelchair in the door.
Oh, my Lord.
And that was supposed to be a handicapped accessible room. Well, it's got a handicapped accessible bathroom. You can get a wheelchair in the bathroom if you can get the wheelchair in the door.
There's so many things that as a non-chronic illness, non-disabled person, I guess, I don't realize, I don't think about. And I think let's talk about your book for a minute. Nancy's new book is called Rebels with a Cause. And we were talking about it also earlier. And I think that maybe everybody should read it and really learn what life can be like.
Well, it's an interesting book, and thank you. I'm really excited about it. 15 women from all over the world wrote chapters in this book. And it's a #1 bestseller on Amazon in 35 different categories in 8 countries, and it just came out on Tuesday. So
that's so exciting. That's fabulous. Congratulations, really.
Thank you. And it's really an incredible book because these 15 individuals all have some form of disability. They either have a chronic illness like I do, they have ADHD, they have a just all kinds of issues. And the chapters are all about these individual women who have, in one way or another, accepted their diagnoses, accepted their lives, and have moved on to have thriving, successful lives, regardless of what's going on in their bodies. And it's a great way, as is yours, it's a great way of showing people that we do have to stand up. And like my title, Chief Flying Pig Wrangler, if you sit there and wait for pigs to fly, nothing's going to ever happen. You have to get out there and do things and make life happen. And I think with a disability, and you talk about the doctors, you talk about all of these different things. And I think in particular with these hidden disabilities, we have to do that more than anyone else. You get on LinkedIn, you get on Facebook, or you get out there and read research, and you see where disabilities are generally classified as things that people can see. They're the visible. Yeah. They're your broken arm.
Broken arm.
They're being in a wheelchair. They're blind. They're deaf. They're all of these things. And even those individuals who have those kinds of disabilities find it very difficult to live in our world today.
Well, what's so interesting to me from what you're saying is that people with disabilities do sound as if they're getting, I guess I'd say, the short end of the stick. And yet when it comes to medicine and diagnoses, I think women get the short end of the stick as well. So Absolutely. Being a woman with a disability is a double whammy. As I know, there's like 12 million people each year that are misdiagnosed. Women are misdiagnosed 20 or 30% more than men are. And so I can imagine how it must be for you when you go in with a disability and they don't even know what you're talking about, like complex, whatever you said, pain syndrome.
Yeah. It's really, it's interesting because, these invisible disabilities, oftentimes, as I mentioned, I think when we were talking earlier, I was in a very serious hit and run car accident almost 9 years ago. And I fell out of my car and my left foot fell into a drainage ditch. And my body twisted left and then right, and then I went down. Yep. And immediately my foot swelled and it turned black. And, it just was, I couldn't put any weight on it. And I thought, well, because I'd had problems with that foot. I'd had a surgery on it years and years earlier. And I thought, well, I just twisted it. I've just messed it up. It'll be fine.
Right.
The next day it wasn't fine. And we went to the doctor and the doctor said, go get x-rays. X-rays showed nothing.
You're kidding.
Nope. They showed nothing. So we figured it was just a sprain like I had thought. But it didn't go away. And it took 5 doctors in 6 months to figure out I had broken bones, torn tendons, and torn ligaments.
Oh my goodness. How come
5 doctors. The only way they ever found it was by doing an MRI. And I couldn't get them to do an MRI because it's costly, and they didn't see anything wrong with the x-rays. And so once they finally did the MRI and saw what was wrong, they immediately did surgery. Well, by that point in time, and this is what often happens with a chronic illness, at that point in time, it was too late. If they had caught what I had, the underlying thing that I had was this complex regional pain syndrome, which is severe nerve damage. And if they had caught it prior to the 6 months, they could have turned it around and cured it. But because it was after 6 months, it had set in and there's no going back.
But it's, one of the things I also learned from my interviews is that so many women don't get second opinions. And here you're saying you got 5. I mean, that's fantastic. We just hesitate to get second opinions. And you're a perfect example of why we shouldn't.
Well, this wasn't really a second opinion. It was my first doctor said, I'm just an old country doctor. I can see there's something wrong, but I don't know what it is. You need to go see a specialist. First specialist we went to see says, Well, I operate on hips and knees. Go see my partner. Went to see the partner. The partner says, well, yeah, but I don't see anything that I can do for you. So you need to go see a physical therapist. They then sent me to a doctor that did physical therapy. And all he wanted to do for the 6 months was the physical therapy. And I said, it's not helping any. Then I went and got a second opinion.
Well, then you're not a good example. You just flunked. No, second opinions. That's maybe the most important chapter in my book.
Yeah.
There are, this is really important too, that we don't realize how many diseases. Well, there must be 20 or 30,000 different diseases out there. Mm-hmm. And many of them have the similar symptoms. So if you go in and you tell the doctor, well, I'm in pain, or I'm tired, or I'm no energy, no appetite, whatever, those general symptoms, that can fit, a huge percentage of those 20 or 30,000 diseases. So for the doctor, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Yeah. And he may or she may be right. They may not be. And it's up to you, which I shouldn't say because it's, of course, none of us are doctors, but you got to do your research. And if the diagnosis doesn't feel comfortable, go to somebody else and get it verified.
Yeah. You know your body better than anybody.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
When I was diagnosed with fibro was like 30 years ago. And
yeah.
At the time, they didn't know what fibro was. And
right,
they told me they were going to give me a frontal lobotomy.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
So, then they tested me for everything. Fibro at that point was a disease of elimination. So they tested you for lupus. They tested you for, all these different disabilities and diseases. And well, you don't have any of those. So what's left is fibro. So that's what you were dealing with back then. But now it's actually, and I tried to get Social Security disability at the time, and they told me, if you can lay in bed and sell light bulbs over the telephone, you are not disabled.
Oh, my goodness.
So it really is hard, especially for women. And if you think about years ago, the complaint of men when women were having, medical challenges, well, it must be that time of the month.
Yeah, right.
All of those kinds of things. Our women are just so emotional.
Right.
And, so we have to deal with those stereotypes, those stigmas. And oh my goodness, it's tiring.
Well, it is tiring. And we should talk for a minute, just from listening to you, about maybe it's really important to research your doctor. In fact, incidentally, my book has a wonderful, if I say so myself, but a wonderful resource list at the back. So when I say do your research, I've done it for you. And you really need to research a doctor before you go. I always want to know, where were they trained? That's really important. Where did they do their residency, their internship? Do they have any malpractice suits? Go to, is it Yahoo or one of them where you can, it's in my book, I don't even remember. See what patients say, because, it's a profession like anything else, and every profession has its share of lemons. I don't care if you're a doctor, a plumber, a hairdresser. We've all had bad haircuts, Yeah. I mean, it really just depends. Just because somebody's a doctor does not necessarily make them an expert. No. More than likely it does, but not always. And I think,
and an expert, they're probably an expert in what they've been trained for. But if you go to a gastroenterologist because you've got stomach pains and they're looking at you, they're not trained in diabetes.
Well, you're absolutely right. I just want to interject for a moment, because what's really interesting, and this is in my book, if you go in with symptoms, the same symptoms, I don't care what they are, you go to a gastroenterologist, more than likely he or she will tell you it's just stomach pain. If you go to a rheumatoid arthritis guy, they'll say, it's probably joint pain. If you go to a psychologist, they'll tell you it's probably stress. I mean, we all see what we expect to see.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to know, because we tend to diagnose, or I shouldn't say I'm not a doctor, but doctors see what they expect to see, and they diagnose what they see most of the time. So if you're a psychologist, you see stress most of the time. Obviously, it's a select population. And the same is true for any specialist. So I think that that's important for people to understand.
Well, and that brings us around to the second opinion again.
Yes, it does. Absolutely, it does. Absolutely. I mean, I was in a car accident. That's how I broke my arm. And I knew something was wrong. And it was easy. They took an x-ray and they said I broke my arm. But if they had told me it was stress, no, stress didn't make my arm swell up. And, I've never had pain like this in my life. I mean, come on, I would have gone for a second. I knew something was wrong and I knew it wasn't stress.
Yeah. I've got right now in one of my feet, they fused it. So I've got a metal plate in it and I can't move it.
Yeah.
And I can tell there's something not right. And I've gone to like 4 or 5 different doctors and they say, well, you can't be having problems with it. You've got this fusion in there. You can't move it. And I'm going, it moves. It hurts. It's just so frustrating, but I can't get anybody to listen. So now next month I'm going to a whole nother doctor. But the only thing these doctors have been telling me is, well, if it hurts, we're just going to amputate.
No.
And I went, it doesn't hurt that bad.
Well, yeah, right. And just be sure you go to a doctor that specializes in feet. You want an MD that's a foot doctor.
This was sadly.
Go to a different one. That's my advice.
But how much of this can we take? And there's got to be something that we can do that will help us. It's been almost 9 years for me. You said 5 to 7. I'm on 9,
Yeah, well, the problem with autoimmune diseases, I mean, and you know certainly more than I do, is that the symptoms mimic each other frequently, and there's no necessarily any definitive test. They're extremely difficult to diagnose. And I'm sure there are specialists. I mean, like the Mayo Clinic probably might have a clue. But that's why I'm saying it's really important not only to research your doctor, but what's their specialty, and what hospital are they associated with.
Yeah.
And your hospitals get graded, and the hospital may get an A+ in cardiovascular stuff and a D-. Well, they'll never, an A+ hospital wouldn't get a D-, but let's say a B- in joint and rheumatoids. I mean, I don't know.
And that's true. My husband just had triple bypass heart surgery, and our hospital is rated A+ in cardiology. So I felt very comfortable with him having a surgery there. Me, on the other hand, I drive 3 hours north to Vanderbilt in Nashville because I can't get a doctor in Huntsville to even understand what yes is
right.
You do, and that's by doing research and looking up and talking and everything else. And I can't believe I just looked at the clock and we are well over our time.
Oh wow, look at that. I didn't realize either, but this was wonderful. Thank you.
This was great, but I know you've got something you're expecting. So we're gonna wrap this up. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you need to address before we close?
Let's see. We talked about the shame. We talked about second opinions. We talked about the conversations, how to talk to you. No, I think we covered a lot.
We covered it all.
So interesting to learn as much as I did from you. I appreciate it. Well, I really do.
Thank you. And I am going to sit down after we're done and read another chapter of your book.
Just read the resource list in the back. If you read nothing else, so at least I'll bet you've never heard of, I think it's called Leaping Frog or Frog Leaping, something like that, Leapfrog. It'll tell you I think it's the one that tells you how to rate your hospitals. I mean, check it out.
I will, absolutely. That's great. So anyway, we are going to close now. And thank you, Susan, so much for all the wonderful information today. Finally, to wrap things up, often after a podcast, people want to know more about some of the things that we do at Invisible Warriors. And if you'd like to hop on a Zoom, my contact info is in the show notes, as is Susan's. If anybody has any questions and would like to talk to you, I'm sure you would.
Oh, I'd be delighted. Absolutely delighted.
Okay. Right now, here at Invisible Warriors, we are working on an art contest called Beauty Within and Around. What does it look like to live a day in the life of someone with a chronic illness? If you'd like to showcase your artwork of any medium, head on over to invisiblewarriors.org/events and check out the events page. We'd love to include your vision of chronic illness. And with that, it is closing, so you're going to have to hurry on over to do that. But if you've liked listening to Don't Wait Till Pigs Fly, please give us a quick review and rating on iTunes. And don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. So until next time, guys, get out there, be productive, and soar higher. Take care, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye, y'all.
That's it for today, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. Today's podcast has been brought to you by the Invisible Warriors Club, a program of Invisible Warriors. They see how hard life is for these women and hate that the world doesn't seem to understand that these diseases/disabilities are serious, life-changing challenges which bring about poor medical treatment, high and unrealistic medical bills, lack of ability to sustain working conditions and loss of family cohesiveness. Through advocacy and programs, this organization extends a nurturing hand, fostering both awareness in the community and individual growth amidst adversities. Join them by heading over to the Invisible Warriors website for more information on how to join the club.